Climate change affects everyone, but how do we get everyone to work together to solve it? At the end of the month, the focus will be here, in Paris, as world leaders meet to try to agree a plan of action. But in a world filled with competing interests, reaching an agreement is no easy task. Let's look at some of the key players. First, the big emitters. EU countries relied on fossil fuels to industrialise, but now they're moving away from heavy industry and they're encouraging other countries to lower their emissions too. But it's not that simple. Rapidly developing countries like China and India rely on fossil fuels for economic growth. They don't see why they should have to curb emissions while others, like the EU, got to use fossil fuels in the past. Then there are countries like the US. They're worried that if they curb their emissions, they'd lose industry to places like China and India. Between them, these countries emit over half the world's carbon dioxide. But what about the countries which will be heavily affected by global warming, without being able to do much to stop it? Places like the Maldives and the Marshall Islands, which risk getting eaten up by sea level rise. In the past, finding a deal that everyone would agree to seemed impossible. After years of trying to divide up responsibility, in Copenhagen in 2009, it finally became clear that no one plan would work for everyone. So the Paris talks are taking a different approach. Pledges. Each country independently pledges how it intends to lower its emissions. These pledges are called intended nationally determined contributions. This seems to be working well. So far, 158 countries have submitted their pledges. For example, China have pledged to peak their CO2 emissions by 2030, and the European Union have pledged to reduce their greenhouse gases by 40% by the same year. But the pledges don't add up. Combining them allows you to estimate how hot the globe will get if everyone meets their target. As it stands, we're facing a world 2.7 degrees warmer than before the Industrial Revolution, still well above the 2-degree threshold agreed by the international community. What's more, the pledges themselves are only the start of the Paris negotiations. Will the deal be legally binding? How do we make sure countries stick to their pledges? And then there's the matter of money. Many pledges from developing countries rely on support from wealthier states. Developed countries have committed to providing $100 billion a year from 2020 onwards, mostly through a green climate fund. But it's still not entirely clear where all this money would come from, and which countries would receive it. The task faced by decision makers in Paris is huge, and the stakes couldn't be much higher. What will a deal look like? Can a deal even be reached? It won't be long before we know the answers to those questions.